Today, I want to talk to you about why rental pricing isn't the problem that you think it is. Welcome to the Intentional Success Podcast, where we unpack the top strategies, explore business trends, and drill down into best practices to help your live events production business grow and scale on purpose. I'm your host, Tom Stimson. So many years ago, my wife was way into horses, and we owned a couple of horses. And so I spent a lot of time up at the stables with her while she rode. I was not a big horse person. I actually landed on the ground more times than I want to admit. And at least one trip to the emergency room, but that's fewer than my wife's had. But that's a different story. Horse people are interesting characters, particularly the old timers. And one of the things that they talked about, when the people were talking about, well, I want to buy a horse. What is this horse worth? The old timer would always pause and say, a horse is worth whatever you want to pay for it when you buy it. Well, what is a horse worth when you sell it? A horse is worth exactly what somebody's willing to pay for it when you want to sell it. And if anybody, and they'd always say, and if anybody ever offers you money for your horse, take it. The answer is always yes. I will sell you my horse. Either you're going to keep the horse forever, in which case the price doesn't matter, or you take it. Now, the same thing could be probably said of things like boats and camper trailers and a whole lot of other things that we buy that don't really retain their value. They have more emotional value. They have specific value. They meet your needs. And horses are very much like that. Here's another thing. I think shows are like that too. What we do in show business is also based on the moment. At any given time, sometimes you're selling a horse and you need to take whatever people offer you for it. And other times you have the horse that people want, in which case you can probably command a higher price, but you also risk not getting the sale and getting stuck with the horse. Now, if you've got three people who want to buy your horse, well, that's a different problem, isn't it? Right? So pricing in rental comes from the old school rental model. And while I've always said, I love the idea of rental. Rental is great. You buy equipment, people pay you money, they use it, they give you the equipment back, you get to keep the money. You get to sell the thing over and over and over again. And we've all heard the story about how, flip charts, were bought for $100 and the pads cost $3 and you sell the pads for $25 and you rent the flip chart for $150 and they last 20, 30 years, right? Huge returns. Rental is awesome. Great when you can get it. One of those cheap folding ballroom chairs, those plastic chairs that you get, cost $12 to buy and they rent for $8. Rental is a great business to be in, but we all know there's a lot of other stuff going on in rental that has overhead costs, implications, and direct costs to be in that business. So rental pricing, this comes up pretty much every day. We're all consumed by the concept of pricing. How do we price this job? Somebody undercut me. Somebody sold it for less. I can't believe what these people are asking. Things like that. And we think there's a definitive answer. And trust me, folks, if I had a definitive answer, I'd have given it to you, so that we can worry about more important things. But the thing is there is no definitive answer. The value of what you have is worth something different to every buyer on every day. Now, how are we going to live our life differently? If I have to abandon this notion that I have a price list that matters and that there's value we need to protect. One of the things that people tell me all the time, they tell me that my inventory has value. I need to know when I put it on an order, I need to know what the cost is to put it on there to make sure that I cover the carrying cost of that piece of equipment. They tell me we need to protect our pricing. If we don't protect our prices, it's a race to the bottom. Prices don't mean anything. How can we ever sell anything? How can we distinguish ourselves? How can we put value on our value proposition if we don't have a pricing system? I understand this. These are valid concerns. We want that structure. We want that backing that tells us it's okay to stand our ground. But what is more valuable is self-awareness. Okay. This horse costs me $350 a month to board, feed, and take to the vet. On a bad month, I might have to spend another $1,500 on the vet because there are no cheap vet visits when you're dealing with a 1-ton animal. So there are costs for all of your stuff. When somebody offers you money, you have to figure out how to take it. Our job in sales, when we are selling our products and services, is to win gross profit. We think we're winning revenue. Revenue is meaningless, right? You could win $1 million of revenue and have $999,000 worth of expenses, which means you just wasted a lot of people's time. Well, except the buyer, they made out like a bandit. So revenue is not important. What's important is the amount of gross profit you could win. So we need to change that mindset. If gross profit's what's important, how do I know what my gross profit's going to be? And this is what drives everybody nuts, because they keep trying to apply things to their value of their inventory and the cost of prep and their share of the overhead, when in fact, most of that doesn't matter, right? And that's frustrating, and I get that. So we need to do a couple of things in our business. One, refocus on gross profit. We have to rebalance our revenue streams, because when we do have to put a price on something, what we're looking at is what is the cost of that thing, therefore what should I charge? Because the difference between what you charge and the cost is your gross profit. What should your gross profit be on a piece of equipment? That's not an important question. Actually, if you own the piece of equipment, your gross profit should be 100%. Okay, whatever you sell it for is gross profit. You can sell it for more, you can sell it for less. That's how you change the gross profit. But services have a direct cost. They have an inherent cost. We can measure it. Human talent, toil, labor, time, intellect, we can put a price on because we know what that costs. Most of us would benefit greatly from a better understanding of what services cost and putting an appropriate gross profit on top of services. Oh, Tom, that means I'd have to charge $1,500 an hour or $1,500 a day for a technician. Yeah, you might. Oh, my clients won't pay for that. Not if you present it the way that you just sold it to me, right? Right. I say this all the time, right? What do you pay a plumber, right? You pay a plumber $150, $180 an hour. They're making $45 an hour. The company provides them a tool and trucks and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay. You do the same thing with technicians. You're not paying for $150 an hour for a technician or $1,500 a day. Okay. You're paying for access to someone who has all the resources that you provide. Not the least of which is you found them. Okay, you have access to this person. You can procure their services, whether they're on staff or they're a freelancer coming through an agency. The fact is, the act of getting that talent has value. So when we start adding all of these things up, the value of services is where we need to pay attention to our money. And if we do that, the rest of the money comes a lot more easily. Now, to put this in rental terms, because many of you right now are thinking, Tom, that's not how rental works. We add up the equipment, there's a rental price. We add up the labor, there's the labor price. The price is too high for the customer. We discount the equipment. Okay, do it the same way. Raise the price of the labor when you add up. Oh, by the way, add the labor up first, then add the equipment. And if that doesn't meet the customer's need, reduce the amount of equipment. You can discount the equipment. I don't care. But if you don't charge the right number for services and you don't make gross profit on services that's commensurate with the value and the risk of that, the rest of it doesn't matter. Now, I know what you just heard. You're saying, Tom, you're telling my equipment's not worth anything. I paid $80,000 for this and I can only charge $500 a week for it. Yeah, sometimes that's all you're going to get. No big deal, right? Other times you're going to get $5,000 a week. Great. But the talent that it takes to make that work is always going to be valuable regardless of what the rental price was. That's what we need to understand. If you sell integrated services, in other words, you put people and equipment together to do something where they have to know what they're doing, They have to follow a cue. They have to have timing. They have to create environment. They have to have perfect sound. They have to make crisp video. Okay? They have to record some. All of these things are extremely valuable, much more so than the equipment that it takes to do it. Okay? Now, back in my day, the ratio of labor to equipment was completely different. When I was making $10 an hour as a freelancer, the companies were charging $30, $35 an hour. That's a huge markup, right? That's a great margin on labor. And they were buying a piece of equipment for $100, dividing it by 10, renting it for $10 a day. Or they were buying a piece of equipment for $1,000 and renting it for $100 a day, right? But they made huge margins on labor, and it didn't take much labor back then. 18 slide projectors at $400 a day purchase price, that's $40 a day rental. We weren't talking huge numbers here. And one technician could go out with basically 5 times the value in equipment and do a show by themselves. But that's not the world we live in today. Right? The price points of equipment, the complexity of technology, the number of people it takes to execute well have all changed. Okay? But our model didn't change. We still think like rental people, so we still think that there's value in that equipment. So what do we need to do differently? It's the things I've been telling you. Okay? You need to price dynamically. Okay? What your equipment is worth changes all the time. It is the horse in this game, right? The value of the people, the value of the rider, okay, is always high. And if you have no equipment at all, the value of the rider is twice as much. Right? So if somebody wants your rider to go on their horse instead of on your horse, the cost of that rider just went up. You don't rent that rider to somebody else for the same money that you pay them, or the same money that you would charge a client that's hiring you to do the entire show, right? So price things dynamically. Your equipment is worth different amounts of money at different times of year. Your talent typically is worth the same, whether they are staff or not. Now, does talent create some margin that you have some flexibility with? You can choose to use your flexible margin any way that you want, but your accumulated gross profit, the margin of all the things that you sell, go into a bucket. For my money, I would never discount labor. And this is something we have always said in the rental business. We discount equipment. We don't discount labor. Reducing your margin on labor is a discount. Lowering the day rate is a discount. Okay. Compromising on the number of people you put on a job to do the job well is a discount. Having somebody who's extremely well qualified working at a lower qualification job is a discount. All of these discounts, all of these subsidies, okay, are only unfair to you. Sometimes they're also unfair to the worker, right? But they convey the wrong thing to the customer. Okay? Somebody at another company, that same freelancer that you're hiring, that company might be charging way more than you're charging. Now, that may give the customer a reason to come to you, but it doesn't give the freelancer a reason to work for you, right? So think about what the value of your services are. Build it around the people. Price lists. Why do you have one? Sure. I need a price list. I'll argue that you need a price list for talent. You need a price list for labor day rates for positions that you sell. That makes perfect sense. We also need a supply chain that can meet our criteria for that value. Sometimes we don't get them. Sometimes the person we need to hire charges us what we charge the customer, right? If you're used to working on very small margins for labor, that's going to happen to you an awful lot. And that is a formula for disaster, not just for the show. Okay. That is a formula for disaster for you financially, because one, it is the definition of not being scalable, right? You need to be able to reliably hire the best talent available for that position within the level of skills that's appropriate for where you fit into the marketplace. You need to be able to hire that person at all times and make a margin. If you're not making a margin, if you're not making gross profit on talent, okay, you're not going to survive in this business. It's easy to make gross profit on equipment. Get used to making less gross profit on equipment because you need to be making more gross profit where you're creating value. So you don't really need a price list anymore for equipment because one, it's meaningless. You made it up. And if you say, well, I looked at what my competitors were charging, guess what? They made it up too. It is absolutely meaningless. There is no formula. It's not like any other industry where you say, hey, the standard markup margin, blah, 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 on this manufactured product is. We're not selling a product, we're renting it. It's worth what the market will bear, right? So you can have a price list, but everything gets negotiated from there. So you may have a starting price list. Should you be reviewing it all the time? Yes, you should. Because when I say dynamic, all you heard was sometimes I lower the price. Why wouldn't you sometimes raise the price? Oh, but my customers would freak out. Why do your customers know what your price list is? Right? You don't need a price list. Okay? You need a list of the things that you can access, the tools and products and the way that you put them together. That's important to you. You need to know what the cost of that is. And this is why for years I've talked to you about replacement cost. Now, the cost for something that you own is arguably zero. You've got some overhead, you've got some carrying costs, which trust me, you'll never calculate. And they are useless anyway because your customer couldn't care less. But if you're trying to figure out what something is worth in the marketplace, replacement cost gives you that information. So instead of a price sheet, what you need is a cost sheet. And if you have a cost sheet, then you're just like every other industry. When you call a systems integrator and say, I need to install a sound system, a projector, and a screen and a camera package into this house of worship or this ballroom or whatever it might be, they are looking up parts and pieces at cost. They are adding margin to it. They're calculating the amount of labor it's going to take to fabricate it, the amount of talent it's going to take to engineer it, to draw it, to design it. All of those things have margin on them. Everything is margin added. Cables and accessories, huge margin is added to cables and accessories in an integration. All of that stuff gets added up and the price gets presented to the customer. Okay. You don't see the giant variations in pricing in the installed environment that we see in the live event environment. And the reason is they start from cost. Now, do I think they add reasonable margins? No, I don't. I think their margins could be much better. Some markets they are, some small integrators are getting great numbers, but the big integration world, you get 5 big integrators, they're all going to be within a 0.5% of each other, right? Now, that's not as fun and exciting to me as our business is, where it is much more regional and it moves around. Our circumstances are much more fluid, but our jobs are finite. Integration, you can have an installation deadline and you're going to hit it anywhere between 3 and 6 months because you have no control over the environment. Our shows happen when our shows happen. Service value is much higher, much better margins there if you get them. So lose your rental mentality. Okay. Rental pricing isn't the problem. The fact that you have a rental price list is the problem. Get yourself a rental cost list. Learn how to sell from cost. Okay. Add up all the costs, apply a margin to it. Add up all the costs of labor, apply a margin to it. Add up the costs for specialty sub-rentals, outsourcing, logistics, travel, whatever it might be. Add a margin to it. Okay. If you add margins to things, notice I didn't say markup. If you add margins to things, that margin is what you're going to make. Okay. If you add markup to things, you're going to talk yourself out of markup because markup is an emotional choice. Margin is a logical one. So learn how to use margin to get to a sell price and never talk about the margin on an individual item. Apply margin to everything in your quote. You've got a package of margin. I just wrote a $150,000 quote with $80,000 of margin in it. I don't care where the margin came from. If I wrote the quote appropriately, I know I've got some room to negotiate on margin. And you might have $30,000 to negotiate on margin. Okay? That's fine. I'd rather make $50,000 on a $150,000 job than $0 because I sold it from price and tried to discount it and competed with people who didn't know how to do service pricing. They're doing rental pricing. You know what? Rental pricing will always win. I can give people a 100% discount. They'll buy from me all day long. And I won't make any money. Because if my labor is priced the way that I price rental, there's no margin left, right? So learn how to price. Pricing comes from costs. Quit thinking like a rental person. Think like somebody who's putting together a valuable integrated service that nobody else can do on that day, at that time, at that value. Good luck. Thanks for listening. If you want to find out more about today's episode, go to trstimson.com/podcast, where you'll find the show notes, related links, and tons of other valuable resources. If you haven't already subscribed to the Intentional Success Podcast, please do so, and I'd greatly appreciate if you would rate and review the show. Also, if you think you might be a good fit to work together or want more information about the Stimson Group, I'd love to hear from you. Visit trstimson.com for more information.